I think from the French politics side, it's very complex, very uncertain, and very much stuck, the situation. There is some kind of weakening of the French economy. And the big worry, of course, is that uncertainty will cause this weakening to be a bit deeper. The big issue at this stage is the situation with public finance.
With the vote of no confidence and resignation of the Prime Minister, France's politics are once again in turmoil at a time of vulnerability for the French economy. Joining me now to talk about it is Charlotte de Montpellier, senior economist at ING. Thank you very much for taking the time for us today, but let's begin with the real basics. So how would you describe the current state of both French politics and the economy?
So I think from the French politics side, it's very complex, very uncertain, and very much stuck, the situation. So we have a parliament that is very much fragmented, and it means that the government, for them, it's very difficult to have a majority. So there was a government with François Bayrou. Now there is a new prime minister, but the issue is still very much there. The centrist bloc in the parliament does not have a majority. So it means that any agreement needs to have the support of other parties, and it's not something that is very well an habit in France. They are not used to have big consensus, big compromise between groups at the assembly, and this means that it's very difficult to make reform go through, to vote a budget, and to find a way to solve the public finance situation. On the economic side, things are doing okay in the sense that the first half of the year was not that bad, and clearly better than Germany. But still, there is some kind of weakening of the French economy. And the big worry, of course, is that uncertainty will cause this weakening to be a bit deeper. You know that when it's very uncertain, when companies do not know what type of taxation will be in place in the next month, they tend to postpone the decision, so they do not hire, they do not launch investment plans. We are a bit afraid also that consumers are going to be much more cautious in their consumer behavior. So altogether means that probably the French economy will weaken due to this uncertainty.
Yeah, so Germany obviously is stagnating at the moment. Coming from a German broadcaster, we should mention that France is doing better off, that's for sure. But let's go to the heart of what's kind of triggered all of this. Tell us about that policy to reduce the deficit. So public spending is putting France into further debt, and the government has tried to reduce that by slashing spending. The Bayrou government proposed saving 44 billion euros by scrapping public holidays, freezing pensions and so on. So why did those particular measures prove so explosive?
Yeah, so the big issue at this stage is the situation with public finance. So just to give you a number, we are now with a debt level to GDP to 115 or 114%. So that's very high, much higher than a few years ago. And if nothing is done, it will continue to increase and increase and increase. So if there is no reform, we will reach 125% of GDP for the debt level in 2029. So that's quite a big, difficult situation because as such, when nothing is done, public finance has deteriorating quite strongly, quite quickly. And this is because of the aging of the population. And we have a big cost of social security, pension system. All of this is very costly. So by itself, it leads to too much spending and a debt level to GDP that is increasing quite a lot. So that's, of course, the big issue. And in a situation like that, any government would have to make to find some savings, either save on the spending of the government or increase taxation. So that's a bit what is at stake at this stage, or to have an improvement in the public finance situation. The Bayrou government tried to make it more a spending question, so saying, okay, let's save more because taxation in France is already very, very high, and taxation was increased last year. So he said, okay, let's make it as a saving question, and he wanted to save 44 billion. But of course, any saving is a unpopular because it means that some people will be in a worst of situation. And so that's the big issue right now. Probably the next government will try another strategy, but the problem remains very much that public finance are completely in a very difficult situation and not going to solve by itself.
Okay, so you say that the deficit is unsustainable, but France has run deficits for decades without a collapse or any sort of calamity on that level. But why is this moment different? Is it just merely that the population is aging, as you mentioned, and that makes this a very different type of deficit structure than previously?
Yeah, of course, if you look at the situation from the eyes from Germany, it seems that it has always been the case, but actually the situation has deteriorated quite strongly during the past few years. Since the pandemic, basically, deficit has been much higher than the 3% target. We are speaking here for this year around 5.4, 5.8% of deficit. And next year, if nothing is done, it's going to be 6% again. So as such, without changing anything, deficit is completely going in the wrong direction. And in the history, France always had the deficit, but not as bad as it is the case right now. And the issue is that with the aging of the population and with the fact that potential growth in France is quite low, around 1 to 1.2% a year, both together means that as such, public finance will continue to deteriorate. It's very clear right now, and this means that the country needs reforms. Okay, that's a thing, but it's very difficult to make reform when you have a parliament that is very much fragmented, as it is the case right now. So it means that the likelihood that a reform will go through in order to reorganize a big public finance is very low, and that's of course a worry. When you have a majority in a parliament, you can hope that some reform go through and that the situation can resolve itself. At this stage, it's not as clear.
Okay, so then let's look at those political differences, starting with the left-wing party, La France Insoumise. They say, for example, that the government should focus on taxing the rich instead of cutting spending, saying that already, especially social health spending cuts are cutting to the bone and affecting the poorest people. But what do you make of their proposal saying that the cuts shouldn't occur and that actually they should just tax the rich?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense given their political situation and also the fact that they are not supporting the government. So they will always take the other way. And so right now the government was trying to focus on spending. So now they focus on taxation. Of course, on paper, it seems very nice, but to be sure, it's not that easy because taxation in France is already very, very high. And there is always this risk when you only tax the rich as they would like, that people just go abroad, just move, and at the end, the revenue that you get from the higher taxation on the wealthy people is not as high as hoped. We are a bit already in the situation, to be sure, because for the budget 2025, there was a decision to increase temporarily taxation on the richest people and also on the biggest company. And it seems that probably the revenue that arrives to the state from those taxation will be lower than expected. So it's probably easy for them from an electoral point of view to point to that direction, but probably won't be enough. So the public finance situation is so deteriorated that there is a need to have also structural reform. And of course, this alone probably cannot do it. So that's a bit the issue at this stage.
Okay, then France does have high taxes, yes, but inequality is also rising. Isn't there some room for shifting the burden at least a little, even if it is to give these left-wing parties something, some sort of bone to throw to them?
Yeah, probably. So that's probably is going to be the strategy of the new prime minister, who was appointed early this week. So probably not a bone for the extreme left parties, because that's a bit extreme, but for the Socialist Party, which is a bit more centrist. So they will try to have their support, or at least that they don't vote the no confidence in the parliament. So this means that the new government that the new prime minister has to form will have to find a common ground, and that will probably probably mean higher taxation because that's what they would like. The big issue will remain the pension system and the retreat. So the age where you can go out of the labor. At this stage, it's at 64 years. For leftist parties, it's very difficult to accept that it's at 64 years. They would like to come back to 62. But from a public finance point of view, it's very, very difficult. And especially if we stay in a context as it is right now, where the money that people retire that they get is quite high and much higher than in other European countries. So it makes the system as such unsustainable. So that will remain a big difficulty. And I think this budget discussion and the forming of the government will take long. And probably we are speaking here about weeks because there is no easy way out of this situation.
Okay, now to look at the far-right National Rally, it says that it wants to respect EU deficit rules on the one side, but also protect French welfare spending. Is that realistic, or are they promising the impossible?
Yeah, I think there it's a bit different because the far-right party is clearly above the other parties in the polls right now. So the best case scenario for them would be a new parliament election because they would like to have more seats in the parliament. So it's not really that they are suggesting solution to the current situation. They are already positioning themselves for the campaign if there would be a new parliament election. And of course, in that it has view, it's very clear that they want to promise things that probably won't be able to happen. So again, if you look simply at the matrix of the thing, the big issue is the aging of the population and lower growth. It means that, okay, you can try to protect the people the better you want, but at some point there is a public finance situation. So there is a need to find a way. Beirut tried by saying, okay, the retired people, they have too much money compared to the working people, so we need to find a way. Probably won't be the stance of the extreme right, but there it's not very clear from their view at this stage where they would like to find the money. At least it's not very clear if they would like to have more taxation, less spending in some specific area. So it seems at this stage a lot of discussion in a campaign mood more than actual way to change the situation and to make it better and to solve the problem.
Now, France's deficit is almost double the EU's limit. Now, what are the consequences if Paris does keep overshooting? Will Brussels or the bond markets even eventually force its hand?
Yeah, so that's the big issue because right now it's double what they should do, but there is this big plan that was sent to European authorities, but also it's very well known by the market that they should go back to 3% deficit in 2029. So that's the aim, the target. Of course, if next year they don't go into the direction that was promised and with this plan, there was also a promise to bring the deficit to 4.6% next year. So if the budget discussion lead to a new situation where France is not going into that direction, that can start to be much more of a worry. So we will need to see. Of course, the European authorities can launch an excessive deficit procedure against France, but will it be enough to change the situation? I don't know. On the bond market side, we have seen still some reaction. So spread have widened. So it means that investors are now requiring a bit more. They want to be to get some more money in order to lend to France. So the risk premium has increased and probably can continue to increase if the budget doesn't go through, or if the budget does go through, but with some postponing of the back to the 3% deficit target. So probably there is still room there. Of course, at this stage, at some point, the question of a full-blown crisis can arise. So are we going to see, since the situation from a political point of view is so difficult, are we going to see that the public finance situation is going to worsen and bond markets are going to panic? That's the question. For there, I think it's probably not the right way of seeing that. I think the most likely scenario is that the public finance situation will be, improve very slightly, and then the rest of the effort will be postponed. That will not piss off bond market too much. So we are not in a crisis mood at this stage. But of course, there is this risk premium that will remain, and it means again that it costs more money for France to borrow, so it's one more difficulty for budget setting. So the problem remains, but I don't think we are in a full-blown crisis at this stage, to be clear.
Yeah, and it's also difficult to see what Brussels could do because there are so many countries in the EU which are over the deficit, so they don't really necessarily have the credibility to intervene. But to talk about those bondholders that you were saying, that they're charging higher risk premia, basically France is getting riskier as they see it, so they want to charge more money. France already spends over 50 billion euros a year just on interest payments for what it's borrowing. How dangerous is that specifically for the future of the economy?
Yeah, so that's one more thing that will make the budget discussion even more difficult in the future. So I was explaining that we have first the fact that the population is aging. As such, it will become a bigger and bigger part of the budget, and you have the interest rate payments that are going to become a bigger and bigger part of the budget, and also because of the monetary policy and the normalization, quantitative tightening. I mean, a lot of things are happening right now, but to be sure, interest rate payment from France to the people lending money to France are going to increase in the future compared to the past 10 or 20 years. So of course, this will be one more strain on the public finance situation. And it means basically that the effort that any government will have to do in the future will be even bigger. So even if we would see a new election or I don't know what, at the end, the budget situation will remain very, very, very difficult and will continue to cause uncertainty, instability in the political system.
Okay, well, look, Charlotte, you've been very generous with your time, but I've got two more questions because I want to pick up on what you were just saying there about the stability. So with so many failed governments in a row, is there any realistic path to political stability in the short term?
Yeah, so I think we will see right now. There is a new prime minister that has been appointed. Now he has to form a government. If he managed to have the support, or at least the tacit support of the Socialist Party, that will be okay for a period at least, and they will need to agree on the budget, but that could happen if they find a common ground. And then let's see. But as I said, since the public finance situation is so difficult, any government will be always very fragile, and especially with such a parliament as it is right now, with a lot of groups, highly fragmented. So I would say that there is a possibility that this new prime minister will succeed to form a government, but it will always remain very uncertain. And the likelihood that again it goes out and there is a need to appoint a new prime minister is still very much high. And I would suspect it can happen more rapidly than later.
Okay, and looking ahead finally, if no party has the courage or capacity to cut spending, what does the next 5 years look like for France? And is really here Macron to blame for these massive cuts that are suddenly needed, which could end up fueling populism, whether it's far left or far right populism?
Yeah, definitely. It probably is going to go into that direction. To be sure, France is not the only country where it is happening, because in other countries in Europe, it's also a bit like that. Right now, I mean, this public finance situation and the fact that there is a need to do some effort is fueling this populist party, to be sure, will probably to continue to be like that. Then it depends a bit what happens, and I think it's also an economic question at the end. So if the economy in Europe as a whole becomes stronger because of, for instance, what is happening in Germany with the infrastructure plan. So if we have a momentum in the economic situation in Europe that is also having an impact on France, there we could see some improvement, because as such, the better economic situation will make things a bit less difficult, and also will make people maybe less unhappy. So that could help. But of course, if the economic situation remains sluggish, a bit muddling through, as it was the case for a few years already, there, of course, it probably will lead to the very difficult political situation with populist parties, and also, the fact that it's fragmented and no way to find a consensus and to find an agreement between parties.
Yes, I can imagine that Macron will be hoping that interest rates will start to fall again in Europe to ease the pressure on debt and to make the problem less urgent. But anyway, for now, we will just have to wait and see what the current government with the new Prime Minister can achieve. Charlotte de Montpellier, thank you very much for your analysis.
You're welcome.